G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it. Welcome everyone. Today I'm interviewing Martin Quinn from M2 Logistics. He's based in Launceston in northern Tasmania, here where I live in Australia. Thanks for your time today, Quinny.
No worries at all, mate. Pleasure to be with you.
Let's start with how we know each other. A great mutual friend of ours and an ex-business partner and a current business partner, I should say, Matthew Will, introduced me to you some years ago. We've had many fun times and laughs and dinners in our northern meetups in particular.
No, we certainly have. It's been... Actually, the Grow a Small Business dinners have been great fun and have led actually to lots of other opportunities for us as well. But Mauser and I have been involved together in business, gee whiz, well over a decade now. And no, it's been fantastic to work with him.
I had him on actually the podcast number 3 that we did when he talked about your previous business, the pharmacy business. And that was a really enlightening podcast for anyone who wants to go back and listen to it. And the cast before that, episode number 2, was another business partner of yours, Charles Beaumont, who we talked about his furniture business, the importer. So we just need to get Tom on here, and then we've got the full set.
Yeah, exactly. You got the flush then.
That's it. We'll tell our audience a bit about your business, what it does and how it makes money.
Yeah, for sure. So M2 Logistics was started in April 2020 at the beginning of the COVID outbreak. We got the sniff one day that the state government was starting to run out of medical grade hand sanitizer throughout the hospital system and just generally throughout the entire community. There was a massive shortage, as you may remember, of hand sanitizer. And a colleague of ours from the Pharmacy Guild rang me and alerted to the fact that this situation was arising. And given we had in the previous gig in the pharmacy done a lot of manufacturing, they thought we might be in a position to be able to assist. Little did we know the volumes that they're after, but that's where it all started in trying to make some hand sanitizer, which was initially going to be made in a small clean room, which we used to have. But yeah, things got a lot bigger than that.
Yeah, and because I did a strategy day with you, Tom and I ran that a year and a half, I think, ago.
But probably more.
Yeah, 2 years ago it would have been. But I remember asking this question and the answer, like how the business actually started. The business model was very different from those first initial conversations with the government, wasn't it?
Oh, completely it was. And yeah, I remember I was actually coming back from Lake Barrington after a rowing weekend and got the notification when I was coming up near ETC there, for those in Tassie who know the place, and got the phone call about it. And by the time I'd reached Deloraine, I'd already spoken to Mauser and come up with a rough plan, which evolved from there.
Yep, because originally you were thinking of just advising the government, kind of on an hourly rate.
Yeah, and that was the initial thought, and that's actually where the initial name came from. M2 Logistics means nothing more than just Mauser and Martin. Yep. So there's no science to it at all because we didn't think the company would last. So it was just, yeah, and you did right. Initially, we thought we'd just provide them some expertise in getting what they needed done, but they weren't interested in that. They actually wanted to purchase product outright. So that's what we assisted them with.
Great. So off you went. And so that was 2020. How old were you when you started that business?
50.
50. Great.
Yeah. And I'd been out of work for probably 2 or 3 years, having sold the pharmacies, and wasn't actively looking to try and get myself busy again, but things eventuate.
Creature of habit, I guess.
Do
you want to talk about how Bowie or Charles Beaumont came into the business?
Yeah. So basically, initially we thought, they'd probably after a couple of 100 litres of sanitizer or bits of that we might better make on a sort of a home scale, for want of a better word. But then they came back, their initial request was for 60,000 litres of hand sanitizer, which was certainly beyond the scope of what we were capable of. And I think this is one of the great things about living in a small place like Tassie, Troy, is that you might remember we were in the heart of lockdown, so you couldn't go out and meet people like you normally could. So a lot of it relied on relationships that you'd formed in other parts of businesses, and again, or people that you knew, which is one of the joys of living in such a small community or relatively small community. So we had organised through a mate of mine from primary school, who's still a great friend of mine, who's the general manager at what was Tasmanian Alkaloids, Colin Ralph, now Extract Tas Bioscience. They're responsible for a lot of the opioid extractions, and also now increasingly medicinal cannabis as well. And being a TGA facility, they had the facilities to make batch quantities of this sort of stuff. And so Ralphie was keen to assist. Actually, on that note, what was great about it too was the fact that because there's been a reduction in opioid usage around the world, they'd just put off 4 or 5 people due to a downturn in production. And so this was a great story because it allowed them to put them back on for a number of months, which was a great added bonus about it.
Yeah.
Another mate who makes used to make yogurt had an old yogurt filler, so we stole the yogurt filler, and the guys out at Tasmanian Alkaloids jerry-rigged that into a bottle filler for us. That had to have some work done to it because it was working in a flammable environment with the ethanol, so they had to put all new motors and make it compliant from that perspective. So there was a huge learning curve as far as all that was concerned. Jonty also, though, from the yogurt manufacturing business, knew a bottle maker, of course, in Huonville, Coloured Containers. So he got us in touch with them. That'd be an interesting one to ever talk to those guys. That business is enormous. And so that was the bottle sorted. Labels we had sorted. There's only one thing missing, and that was the pump lids. And they don't make a pump lid in Australia at all. So we needed to get some in from China. And as you mentioned, Bowie, with his importing business, has got strong connections within China. And so we asked him to source some. I was going to talk about it a bit later on, but one of the things that happened then was that we were actually just using Bowie as an importer and paying him for his services. And we soon came to realise that that business model wasn't going to work. It was getting messy. He was selling it through his stores, trying to differentiate what was his stock that he was selling and what was our stock. It was just becoming a nightmare. And so the decision was made for us to just split the business into thirds at a fairly early juncture and bring Bowie on as a third partner, which was a fantastic decision.
Yeah, great. And I mean, that would have been extremely challenging at that time because all the freight holdups around the world. So if you didn't have that relationship with Charles, he had the connections obviously in China, you guys would have really missed this opportunity.
Oh, we wouldn't have been able to do it. Full stop. There was just no access to that sort of stuff. But the freight was still ridiculous because by that stage you'd already committed and priced the supply of goods to the government, and they were actually literally putting boxes on the airport in Shanghai and other major airports in China and just doing a Dutch auction. And at its peak, we paid $20,000 a cubic meter.
Whoa!
To bring in pump lids.
Jeez.
So it certainly chomped into the profit fairly significantly.
Yeah. Do you have some key numbers you can share to illustrate the growth of the business over the last?
Yeah, for sure, mate. So yeah, as I said, we started April in 2020. So for that financial year, we certainly weren't around for very long. But from a standing start that year, we managed to turn over just on $500,000 because it wasn't just the sanitizer. The government then, I think, because of the way that we'd managed to effectively, from woe to go, from the order to having that stuff in the shelf on their shelves was inside 4 weeks, which was pretty incredible.
That is phenomenal.
From a standing start. We at one stage had all my kids here in the kitchen labeling bottles because we didn't have a bottle labeler at that stage either. So that was the kids' job. And Mauser had his kids on it, and it was just an all-in effort to try and make sure that things happened. But through that, they also approached us to start supplying, or at least quoting and supplying some things that were related, so masks and gowns and gloves, etc. And we were successful in getting a request from them for over 1 million N95 masks as well. A bit like what happened, which we'll talk about hopefully a bit later on with the rats, but there were some very shonky operators in the space trying to get into the space with regards to N95 masks. A lot of counterfeit masks were out there in the marketplace. It was, again, another massively steep learning curve, learning about all the different types of masks. As a pharmacist, had a rough idea, but gee whiz, it's a rabbit warren when you go into it and try and work out all the bits and pieces. So yeah, so 500,000 in that first year with predominantly masks and sanitizer. That continued on through the next financial year where we grew it to about just over 1 million. And then and that's the thing, I suppose, Troy, is we honestly thought this would last 2 or 3 months. And then we'd pack up and go home. So it was around that time we actually changed our business name too, because one of the things you always get told is that your business name should reflect something about the business that you're running. And M2 Logistics means absolutely nothing to anybody, not even to us, really. So Brand Tasmania had just come out with their new Tasmanian branding, and Mauser, through the company that he just unfortunately started prior to COVID, his Go Walk Tas business, had been to a seminar about the Tasmanian brand mark. And so he came up with a very, very bright idea of changing our name to Tasmanian Hand Sanitizer.
Yeah.
Which was a great boon, I think, for us, because it gave us a branding which we didn't have before, and that gave us, I think, the support we got from local community, particularly obviously in Tassie, with that branding was through the roof. And so we continued to grow. We doubled our turnover the year after to 2.5, and then to almost 4 last year.
Yep.
Driven primarily through rats. But now that the COVID situation has not just stabilised, it's reduced and virtually it's gone, although there's a little bit of a blip at the moment. We've only turned over 500,000 this year. So as I was mentioning before we started the podcast, we're in a situation now, we're still holding a considerable amount of stock and we're just trying to convert that into cash, basically.
Yep, great.
But no, it was great fun while it lasted, but I think we're on the downward slope of the roller coaster.
Yep. And how many full-time equivalents did you start with and how many out now?
So we started with just the 3 of us. And it was starting to get ridiculously busy. We were probably all working 1 and a bit FTEs each.
Yep.
So at its height.
4 FTEs?
Yeah, so about 4 FTEs. Yeah. We seriously considered getting a warehouse manager there at one stage. But we just kept on having in the back of our mind, as we mentioned before, that the thing was just going to stop. And it didn't. So we ended up getting the kids to come down. We all got our kids to come down and help, and they still do on occasions. But yeah, for the vast majority of those 3 years, the 3 of us were working full time. But now we've managed to get it. There's probably only a single FTE.
Yeah, right.
Equivalent. If that working down there now, fulfilling orders, we've effectively stopped chasing new business because I don't think the return would be there to invest a whole bunch of time into it these days.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's in a wind down, not stop, but in a wind down and sort of holding pattern at the moment.
Yep. And when was the moment you felt like you had succeeded?
I reckon it's a funny situation, but Bowie often talks about it as well, was the day that those pump caps that we got in at the exorbitant price from China, we had to tell them what bottles we were using, but there was always the risk, and we'd been warned about it, that the lids might not fit the bottles. And if that had happened, then we would have been deep shit. There's no other way to say it.
Yeah.
So Bowie, I mean, we came up here. I had the bottles here because the kids were feverishly labelling them all, and he came up with the lids, and it fitted. And and that's when we knew that we were on to something.
Yeah.
But just those sorts of things, just to being able to deliver on the deliverables was when we knew, because we never in this to make any money, and we haven't made bucket loads out of it. And that wasn't ever the intention. It was to fulfil a need at the beginning, and it's just happened to roll along.
What does success look like to you?
I think it's back to what I was just talking about there. As far as I'm concerned, success, I love the thrill of the chase, Troy. that's probably the favourite thing I had when we had the pharmacy was identifying where there was a possibility for us to squeeze ourselves into a market, and being successful in doing that was and still is the thing that I find the most rewarding about owning a business, where you can identify where there's a gap or where you think that you can improve on what's currently being offered, and filling it is where I get the rewards. I don't necessarily, it doesn't need to be financial. That's a nice benefit, but I think that comes with the other. That's just a byproduct of the other bit. But I just love the chase. And when we did this and we had our branding and we got the Tasmanian Hand Sanitizer, we were like dogs with a bone then.
Hmm.
We were just going out to sporting organisations and small businesses, and the support that we got from places like TT Line, the Education Department, so many government departments, sporting clubs, sporting organisations, was just extraordinary.
Number one thing you'd recommend to marketing a fast-growing business?
Well, we used Tommy Holder, and I think that's what really probably helped a bit, as well as just marketing it ourselves. And again, being in Tassie and being in a situation where it's small and compact. And again, as I mentioned before, we know so many people. A lot of the marketing was almost done by ourselves as well, in that face-to-face and basically hounding people. But certainly Tom at Sleeker was of great help with regards to our social media advertising.
Yep.
And I think that was also instrumental. And I suppose too, as far as digital marketing is concerned, I think, your website's got to be considered a part of that. And that's where Mauser comes into play. It's his gig to do all that. He loves doing that sort of stuff. And we started off using Deer as a platform, which I think was probably a little bit too big for our requirements, a little bit too sophisticated.
That's an inventory management system.
That's an inventory management system, yeah.
Hmm.
And it does come with a web portal to it, but it's hardly what you'd call one that's consumer friendly.
Yeah.
So the decision was made about 6 months in to switch to Shopify, which again I think made life a lot easier, because the website themselves are just so much more user friendly and easier to manipulate to a way in which you want them. So certainly a website in this day and age is crucial for your marketing. But yeah, so it's obviously worked a little bit. We've had a little bit of business from the mainland, but I'd say 90-95% of our turnover has come from Tassie.
Yep. How did you fund the business?
We were lucky that when the state government placed that initial order, we asked for a 50% upfront deposit.
Very smart.
And they came through with that. And so we were really, really lucky that for the first couple of years, until we had that monstrous year a couple of years ago, we had never put a cent into the thing, which was great. We just managed to just fund the whole thing out of the working capital that was generated from that deposit. And then as the sanitizer was produced, they thankfully paid us within 30 odd days, and we managed to fund the whole thing through that. The only time where we got ourselves into some sticky situations was at the beginning, when the rats became available, and we needed to purchase, $1.5 million worth of rats, and we just didn't have the working capital within the business. So the three of us kicked in a short-term loan to allow that purchase, but that was it. So we were lucky. We were really lucky.
If you were to start up today with plenty of funding, would you go into your industry?
No.
Yeah, I almost didn't ask it.
No, I think the horse is well and truly bolted now, Troy, but certainly 2009, 2020, absolutely, yes, it was everything has its timing, and that was its timing there. Although having said that, we're about to introduce, as we talked before, Island Lab, which is a spin-off of Tasmanian Hand Sanitizer. We started some conversations with Essential Oils Tasmania about making some scented hand sanitizers, because one of the things that we noticed was that never, and I think people still do, you stick it on your hands, give it a rub, and the first thing you do is stick it to your nose to see what it smells like, because some of them smell like complete shit. And so they were making some scented ones, and so that started 2 or 3 years ago, and we're very, very close now. It's only taken 2 or 3 years. to make a scented hand sanitizer, which we've also already got into Sapphire. So it's in Sapphire on the east coast of Tassie.
So for the
Which has
audience,
been,
Sapphire is a very premium. It's one of the best boutique hotel in the world a few times. It's $1,800 a night minimum, just for the
yeah,
audience.
it's an amazing spot, and it's nice to go down there and see our stuff in there, which is fantastic. And then so Island Lab will finally have a scented hand sanitizer, but that's going to expand into all sorts of other bits and pieces as well, which is outside the scope of today. But yeah.
Can you outline the most stressful point in your small business growth journey so our audience can learn from it?
I think the cash flow issue that was around the rats was fairly stressful. I mentioned before about the masks and how when the masks were in high demand at the beginning of COVID, there are a lot of shysters pushing A, counterfeit masks, and B, making unrealistic promises. I think that's one of the things that we've tried desperately hard. Certainly in the pharmacy gig, we were conscious of not over promising and under delivering. I think it's a recipe for disaster from a reputational point of view. And again, in a small community like this, if you do that sort of stuff consistently, then people are going to leave you in droves. The only way to get rats at that beginning of that, when they became available at the beginning, about 12 months ago now, the place was flooded with people who had no idea what they were doing. But they were the only people that were bringing them in at that stage. The normal means that we were used to through the pharmacy chains of procuring such things weren't moving dynamically and fast enough. I think they were just too big a beasts to react to the market quick enough. And so we ended up dealing with some fairly shonky people, and there were some sleepless nights wondering whether the stock was going to show up, having paid over $1 million deposit for the bloody things. And they did come, but they came about 4 or 5 weeks later than what they had promised. Chinese New Year got in the way. I think their logistical abilities got in the way. Bowie started smelling a rat with his logistic hat on early 1 or 2 weeks into the piece and go, well, we're in trouble here, boys. So, yes, we had a lot of money out there swinging, and it certainly didn't do us from a reputational perspective any good either, because we had promised what they had advised us, and that didn't occur. So there's a lot of damage control going on and a lot of sleepless nights wondering where the bloody stock was and when it would arrive.
What area in business do you feel you've had to work on the most to add the greatest value?
I think what added the greatest value, certainly to our brand, was moving from just being a hand sanitizer, which it was to begin with, to branding it up, as mentioned before, as Tasmanian Hand Sanitizer, and then getting that brand out into the community through the social media, through word of mouth. We did some newspaper. We even did some television there for a while, just trying to get that name out. And that took a lot of work to do. But I think it paid dividends for sure.
What have you enjoyed the least about managing fast growth?
Very little, to be truthful. As I've mentioned before, it's the favourite part, I think, of having a business. The only thing that I just enjoy the developing of new systems and then looking at them and seeing if they're breaking or where they're breaking, and then critically analysing them to make sure that they're working. And I think that's one of the things that the three of us did really, really well together. So it's really not a case of what I enjoy the least. It's a case of when a business is growing fast, I enjoy the challenge of trying to keep the reins tight. And I find that the most enjoyable the part of it. I think it's what I enjoy the least is a slow growing business, I suppose.
Spoken like a true impatient entrepreneur. Well, that's the next question. What you love about growing a small business? What's been the biggest mindset shift for you in your small business growth journey?
I think it's been reinforced to me time and time again, is to have people with different skill sets and understanding and recognizing your own strengths and weaknesses, and then getting people around you with different skill sets. And personally, I don't think I could ever run a small business. I wouldn't like to run a small business by myself. So if there's a mindset change, it's been over the journey realizing that it's like a hand in glove, that all of us are different, and training ourselves with people with different skills. And we're lucky that three of us in this gig all had came to the table with completely different skill sets. And also just, I think a thing that certainly a number of pharmacists in particular, as an industry that I was well versed in, is that business doesn't just come to you. And in so many places, businesses open the doors and think that that's it. Customers should walk in the door. And I think you've just got to go and find it. And that can be a difficult thing for a lot of people to have the confidence to do. It's one thing to open up a business, which also takes a lot of balls, but then you've got to back yourself. And I think just expecting people to walk in the door can be a bit of a battle. You've really got to go out there and chase it.
Yep. The number one habit you think a small business owner needs to develop and maintain?
I reckon leading by example is a big one. We certainly had doesn't really apply to this because there's only the three of us, and we never really had what you'd call an employee of any full-time or even part-time basis. But being on the ground in a small business, I know that people say that you should have money work for you and not you work for the money, but in a small business, you just need to be a part of it, in my opinion. You need to be committed to it and be there and be responsible for it. And also, so there's two habits. The other one would just keep abreast of your industry and know exactly what's going on in it, and be aware of the changes and the fluxes and the ups and the downs associated with it, from both a trend, but also, again, speaking back to pharmacy, which is a highly regulated and legislated business. Knowing that legislation and regulation inside out is just so critical. That knowledge was instrumental in us becoming, at the time, the largest turnover pharmacy in the state, because we knew the rules and we knew where there were little holes that allowed, they weren't fraudulent by any stretch of the imagination, but people hadn't thought of using those rules in that way. So you've really got to just know what's going on from a regulatory perspective as well. But yeah, I think just being in the business and leading by example makes a huge difference. We had a rule at the pharmacy that wherever possible, there was always a business owner there, and that was probably fulfilled over 90% of the hours that the business was open.
Yeah, very smart. Mouser says on the cast that you guys got up to around $21 million in turnover before you sold out. Yeah,
and we did the same thing. We picked up the model from Kings Meadows, and Mouse wasn't involved in it, but we had another pharmacy in Hobart, and when we purchased that, it had a turnover of sub $1 million. And when we sold that, it also had a turnover of 23 million inside 6 or 7 years.
Wow. Yep.
Just picking up exactly the same business model and dumping it in Hobart.
Yep.
So, yeah, no, it must have done something right because it worked.
Yeah, great work. Want to become the best manager you can be? Check out our Kick-Ass Manager course at growasmallbusiness.com. Do the course and add your fellow managers for no extra cost. Join the 30%. 70% of people quit their job because of their manager. These next two questions are probably more relevant to that chapter of your business career. Can you talk to how you've added people to the team, some wins, mistakes, and advice for those listening?
Yeah, I think we touched on it a bit before, but I think just having people that were from a different skill set. When I first joined, or actually before I joined the pharmacy, Harvey insisted that I go. He was my business partner that I bought the pharmacy from, or half the pharmacy from. That I go to the University of New England, and they used to do these industry-specific week-long finance courses and bits and pieces. So you'd learn the metrics around your business or that industry, and bring that back. And so he did it so that when I joined the pharmacy, I had an idea of what to look for within pharmacy businesses, and so that I wasn't going in with my wool over my eyes. And I went to those courses every couple of years, and as each one was progressively better and better or more advanced. And you get to do those ones with the quadrants of personalities. And I can't, there's thousands of those out there. I don't know which one this one was.
DISC or Myers-Briggs?
Yeah, Myers-Briggs, that was the one.
Yep.
Anyway, it showed that I did it for myself and I did it for Harvey, and it showed that he was a massive ideas, entrepreneurial bloke, but processes were absolutely terrible. My capacity for big thinking ideas from a helicopter perspective weren't that strong, but my ability to implement things was high. And so together we made such an amazing team because he'd come up with these harebrained schemes, and then it would be my job to put them together. And I think that's one of the things when you're in a small business is making sure that you pick partners that are like-minded from a ethical perspective and a work-based, how hard they want to work, etc. But don't try and find a carbon copy of yourself and think that that's going to work, because you're just duplicating yourself and you're not giving yourself a broader spectrum of skills. So my take, the thing that I learned was always to try and find people that we worked with a different skill set. So we ended up with 4 of us out there at the pharmacy, Harv with his helicopter views, me with that implementation, Mauser with his IT side, and then we had Melissa too, who was very strong on the clinical front. So put it all together and it worked.
Yeah. And how big was the team, roughly, full-time equivalents when you sold out there?
About 25.
Yep.
Yeah, so that was great. And what we also did with one of those in particular was send her off to uni, and she actually just registered as a pharmacist or qualified as a pharmacist just the other day. So that was a great outcome as well.
Great. What are some of the things you recommend to building a sustainable and kick-ass culture to help with the growth?
Communication has to be top of the pops in my book, Troy. Everyone's got to be on for the journey. If they're not, then it's just not going to work. So we used to, whenever I mentioned before, you'd find some new business that we'd try and bring into the pharmacy. And when we did, the people that we gave it to treated that little part of the business as their own. And we're really proud when they drove it or found some efficiencies themselves. So I think that was a real part of it. It's just the communicating and making sure that everybody was on board with the same messaging.
Tell our audience how you've handled balance.
Struggled. Certainly through the pharmacy, it wasn't much fun from that perspective, particularly on. We looked after the 2 private hospitals that are also based in Launceston, and so we're on call 24/7. So I'd be leaving home at 7 in the morning, getting home 7:30, 8 o'clock at night, only to get a phone call to race back out to the pharmacy to grab some stuff for the hospitals. So the balance for that first couple of years until we got some more partners on board, it was just Harvey and I, was horrible. We had to get a nanny at home to help on the home front because I simply wasn't around enough. And then Mauser came on board, which certainly did make life a lot easier from that perspective. It got to the stage too where the kids play soccer, and all the parents thought Patsy was a single mum because I was never there. And so when that happened, that was a bit of a reality call for me to say, I've just got to pull back from this.
Yeah.
And that's why I really enjoyed it. Once we sold the pharmacy, the kids were still in their early teenage years, and that was great. Then all of a sudden I could start coaching the sports teams and going to watch everything that they did, and that was fantastic. But no, it is a problem, and look, you would have seen it 1,000 times.
Yep.
And we're all been guilty of it, I'm sure. You just get sucked in, and you just find yourself just with the blinkers on, and everything's associated with your business. But there's tons of people out there with strategies on how to not do it, but gee whiz, it's hard.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I still struggle with it to this day. I've had to put things in place so I stop working.
You do, don't you? Because otherwise you just find yourself just investing more and more and more time in it. And I suppose we're lucky now that we're in a situation where I don't need to anymore, which we're lucky to be in. And so, yeah, I'm enjoying it now that so Tassie Hand Sanitizer is starting to wind back a bit. So giving me a chance to spend more time at home and do things more on a whim, which is great.
How much professional development have you invested in yourself? Not so much from the technical point of view, because obviously you would have had to do a lot of training, keeping up to date with things as a pharmacist, but any other professional development more on the business side, I guess?
Those courses that I mentioned before that Harvey sent me off to were really good. And then obviously we'd go, Mauser and I both did our AICD training, which was also a very worthwhile exercise.
That's Australian Institute of Company Directors, yeah?
Yep. So that was great. And then, of course, with Tassie Hand Sanitizer, there was a lot of steep learning at the beginning with regards to dealing with what's classed as a dangerous good because of the ethanol that was in it, and learning about the rules regarding transportation and packaging and labelling. And so there's a big learning curve in there. But I must admit, most of my learnings, I know you're going to touch on it later on, but most of my learnings from a professional development or from a pharmacy perspective would have come out of journals and the likes of that. And then from a business perspective, Harvey was just an amazing fountain of knowledge when it came to all that sort of side of the business, and he was very free with his information. And I think Mauser talks a lot about him in his podcast as well.
It does, yeah.
And the influence that he had on the pair of us, and the way that we think. And on that front, we mentioned before about Nicole and the fact that she's just got a Bachelor of Pharmacy. We started funding that for her because we could see the potential. She actually won Australia's Pharmacy Assistant of the Year.
Wow.
The year before we employed her, and it was clear that she was punching well below her weight. So we decided to invest in her and fund her tuition through the University of New England. And Harv wrote, I've written it down here, when she sent a lovely letter to us all, thanking us for giving us the opportunity, because she wouldn't have done it otherwise. And Harv wrote back, "It's lifelong learning. I ask just one thing. If there's a chance, make sure you give the gift of opportunity to another."
That's great.
Yeah, which is fantastic. And that was, sometimes professional development can be about yourself. It can be about others around you. So it was fantastic. And she had a tear in her eye, and we think we all did, because it was a great outcome in the end.
Have you had mentors or coaches along the way?
Just half.
Yeah.
That's all. Yeah. Your good self on occasions, but no, he was his knowledge of the pharmacy gig and his knowledge of business and bits and pieces was outstanding. So to be able to be standing by him day in, day out was enough for me.
And do you have a board of directors or advisors at the moment with M2?
No, just the three of us.
Yep.
So predominantly that's been it. We were great there when it was busy, that the three of us were always down there and we could just throw ideas about. And I think that's one of the great things too. We mentioned before about having good business partners, but having partners that can throw up ideas unashamedly and not get precious about when they get knocked down.
Yeah.
Is so important. And the three of us get on famously well. So we can all come up with ideas. Some of them are more shit than others, and some of them are great. And to have a full and frank conversation about which ones are good and which ones are bad, or how you tweak it to make it better, has been something that we've always done and enjoyed doing together. So that's our board of directors is just us just throwing ideas up and seeing what falls out.
Yeah, I've certainly have had plenty of shit business partners, and I've also been a shit business partner at times as well. But the dynamic is really difficult to get right, especially if you go into business with your friends. But I've observed you guys obviously over the years, and have been really impressed with the way that the three of you get along and professionally work on the business. Obviously, you take the piss out of each other occasionally, which is quite funny to watch and be involved in. But it just seems to work really well, because you are three different people approaching things differently, and obviously different backgrounds and experiences as well. But you've got that trust there that someone can put an idea on the table and you'll thrash it about, and there won't be offence taken if it doesn't stand up.
No, that's exactly right. And it just means that you can just throw most ridiculous ideas out there, and there could be a thread inside it which makes some sense. And you're not scared to throw those little threads of advice out, and just, hopefully one of them will stick. And occasionally they have done over the years. They've come from harebrained schemes. There was one where, just back in the pharmacy days, where a doctor was new to town, and I went and met him and came up with a solution for an issue that he had with the supply of a certain drug. And by the end, he was responsible for about 10% of our turnover.
Wow.
Because he ended up being a nationwide supplier of medications for a certain disease state. And because of what we'd done for him, he gave us the entirety of his business.
Wow. Yeah. Now, you're one of the few we've had on that's exited a business, the pharmacy. Any advice for the audience that may be considering exiting or should exit one day?
I suppose we've had a couple of conversations with a friend of mine who's just sold out of a farm as well. And I think honestly, if you're going to exit a business and you've got the ability and you look forward at your life and what you want from it and the requirements of that from a financial perspective, if you can sell your business and get that sort of money for it, then I really can't see the point in flogging yourself out anymore.
Yeah.
And we were lucky that when the number was crunched and they made an offer for the businesses, we looked at it and said, well, that's me done.
Yeah.
Which was, I know that's not the case for very many people, and we're very lucky that was it. But I think if you get an opportunity to exit a business that's going really, really strongly at a price that is well and truly warranted, I don't think you need to be too emotionally attached to it. A bit like flipping houses, isn't it?
Yeah.
People flip houses all the time, and you can get yourself very emotionally attached to a small business. I still go past the pharmacy now and a few tugs on the old heartstrings, yeah, I think if you get the opportunity and the price is right, then I think you've just got to really give it some serious consideration.
Yeah, I think a lot of business owners don't actually think about that number, what would make them comfortable to retire, and then that can start to frame their exit out or the path out. You can change things and set the time frame of when you should start putting the business on the market. So people would be surprised, I think, with what that figure would be to make a comfortable lifestyle afterwards. But again, I think it's the other thing, well, particularly for me as well, is I love what I do. I think a lot of business owners are just so captivated with their business and the joy they get from it. They don't stop to think about that number and when might be a good time.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation to have within yourself, isn't it? And I think it also is something that if you've got a partner, then it's certainly something that you'd want to discuss with them too, and what they want from you, because obviously then it changes the dynamics of the family. If all of a sudden you're not working with your nose to the grindstone anymore, then that's an adjustment as well.
Yeah.
We've had to adjust it on the home front now that I'm about a bit more, which has its pros and cons to it. And then the kids are not far from leaving home, so that's going to be another big one.
Yeah.
So,
All right, Quinn, you wanted our final 5 questions. What do you think is the hardest thing in growing a small business?
I think when you're growing a small business, staff would have to be one of the hardest things, and getting the appropriate mix of staff that have the skill sets required to pull off what you're after and are there with a similar. You can never expect a staff member, or very rarely can you expect a staff member to be as invested into a business emotionally as much as what you are. But if you're going through some growth and you need to get more staff, then you've really got the recruiting process, particularly now. I'm finding that businesses are really struggling on that front in finding both, or anyone, let alone appropriate people to help fund their business, staff their businesses. And also as you grow, as we mentioned before, I think partners are critical. And if you get the right partner in, then what you've divulged yourself of as far as the percentage is concerned can come back in spades. If you get the right partner, then the business will grow commensurately with that. And that's what we certainly found, is that every time we sold down to some new partners, those partners brought new aspects to the business, and the business continued to grow. So actually, from a financial perspective, didn't make any difference at all.
Yeah, that's right. I love that Chinese proverb. It's better to have the tail of an elephant than the body of an ant.
Exactly right.
Favorite business book which has helped you the most?
Well, I'm not that much of a reader, Troy, but one that started years ago, and it's a bit of a popularist one, but I've even had the kids read it, basically because of its simplicity, was Rich Dad Poor Dad. That really started me out on the journey of what to think of as far as how things work and how to get money to work for you rather than you to work for money, etc., etc. I know it's a bit of a cliche, that book, but I really enjoyed it, and my kids have read it, and they really enjoyed it as well.
Yeah, I love that book, and the one he wrote after that, Cash Flow Quadrant, is also excellent.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so much so we even got the board game.
Oh my God! I thought I was a business nerd. I don't even have that game. My daughter's just started her second business. She's 9. Any great podcasts or online? Sorry, mate.
You're right, mate.
Any great podcasts or online learning tools you use for your own professional development?
Well, when I had the pharmacy, podcasts were only just in their infancy, so not really. Obviously, I listened to yours a fair bit, which is great. And then Mauser and Woolser, Tom Woolley, who we haven't mentioned much of today, but he's also involved in the Island Lab venture with us. They often will just throw various random podcasts out into our WhatsApp group for listening. Listened to a cracker the other day actually about a sock company called Bumble. I don't know if Mauser got you onto that one.
No.
Started just two blokes who realised there was a homeless people shelters, and the thing that homeless shelters really struggle for are socks because they're not really a reusable item. So they started a business on a one-for-one basis. Every pair of socks that you buy, they donate a pair to a homeless shelter, and they're now turning over 250 million a year.
What?
Selling socks. It's an incredible story. And but yeah, so those guys will often shoot out various podcasts from all over the place of things that they're listening to. So I don't actually have one that yours would be the one that I listen to the most. And apart from that, it's what those two send through, because yeah. But I don't seek them out.
One tool you'd recommend to help grow a small business?
I think I mentioned it before, but it's not so much a tool, but just know your small business and know the area that you're in, inside and out. Know the space that you're in, no matter what it is, and know the nuances to it, and just have a full understanding of it. If you're going to be immersing yourself in it, then make sure you can swim.
Yeah, that's right. Finally, my favourite question: what would you tell yourself on day one of starting out?
Well, I wrote this down and I wrote, hang on, but then I realised that that's exactly what Mauser's brother Craig, I think, might have said in his Stillwater one. I think he might have put an expletive in front of it. But yeah, if I was starting out now knowing how it all went, then that would still have to be it. It was a very, very fast roller coaster ride, and it really was a case at some stages of just hanging on for dear life and seeing where it took us.
Great. Thanks you very much for your time today, Quinny. Really enjoyed it. I dearly enjoy our chats over a few beers. We'll have to have Sam Reed back on, actually, from Willie Smith's, or yourself, to talk about the brewery that you guys have just opened in Launceston, Duquesne Brewery. So
Duquesne, yes, Sam would be a great one to have on for that.
Yeah.
He's doing a fantastic job down there. It's going gangbusters. So Launceston have embraced it, which has been fantastic.
That only opened September, so like 3 months ago. And I remember Sam telling me, obviously you guys have been working on this for a couple of years, but Launceston is the 20th largest city in Australia, and the largest that didn't have a craft brewery in it. So you guys are on a real winner there, I think. So we'll definitely have Sam on in a year or so once you've got a bit of road behind you on it.
That'd be fantastic. I know he'd appreciate it.
He would. Loves to chat.
Sure does.
Well, thanks, mate. I'll see you up north again for another meetup in February.
Yeah, in the new year. Look forward to seeing you then, mate. And thanks again for the opportunity. Really appreciate it.
And for our audience, we would greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc. So more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.